interrupt my groove today. Been watching race skies move away. I just don't think that I can lose, and I might just take a cruise and let the sunshine play. Something more, something new, something new.
Welcome, everybody. Back again, a glorious Monday. Blessing up today. Welcome back. The Approach Podcast, powered by FanShare. As always, Drew, joined by my man, Drew. Drew, how are you living today?
I'm great. Another week. We're back. Good to have you back this week. But yeah, everything's good, man. We're cruising right along in the season.
We're cruising and cooking.
We'll be at the Players before we know it. So it's good stuff going on.
Oh, no doubt about it. Looking forward to all what we have, but I'm really looking forward to our guest, Evan Crick, at Twitter. I think it's the Crickster. Is that right, Evan?
Yeah, Crickster DFS.
The Crickster. There it is. Well, we appreciate you being on, and let's just let you go out of the gate. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what you got cooking DFS-wise, maybe how you got started in DFS, and what's been your history with it.
Yeah, sure. So I'd say I've always been the type of guy in the friend group that takes fantasy sports a little bit more seriously than everyone else, you know? So I've had that going for me, and I've always loved DFS, whether it's for football or for golf. And I'd say my first love started with football, and I think it was 2020. I had entered like 2 lineups into a Millie Maker and came in the top 1%. And,
nice.
You know, your mind starts to go like, oh man, like I can do this. Like, but you know, when you start to think about it, it's like not really that likely. But so that was my first kind of like dip my toes into the water into DFS. And then things started to really heat up with specifically PGA DFS around the time when the pandemic happened, because obviously it was the first sport that came back. And I've always loved golf. I play a lot as much as I can. And the fact that it was the first thing back, and it allowed us to all kind of, like I said, we were talking pre-show about the evolution of Twitter, about how it's kind of exposed everyone to new faces and new kind of like content that you otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to, since they switched from being just chronological tweets. So that's kind of how I've started to go into daily fantasy. I started following all, you know, you guys, the Pat Mayos of the world, the Rick Gaimans of the world. So that's kind of where I started. Ever since I've kind of wanted to change the way I originally started in DFS, because obviously I was just doing like random contests like the Millie Maker, trying to get the, you know, the big prize. But I realized that if I'm going to be taking it more seriously, it's probably smarter to be entering in smaller contests, or contests that I can at least max enter in, which is why I've been, if anyone follows my Twitter, it's my mission is to beat the mini max. I love that contest. Mm-hmm. It's 50 cents an entry. It allows me to enter in 150 lineups. So that's been my white whale. I've been trying to just go at it. And, you know, we've been having some pretty good success, I'd say, so far. So.
Yeah, well said. And that's one of the reasons that you just mentioned that your kind of content stood out to me. And we'll kind of get into that in a second, but just, you know, there's a wide range of spectrum of different types of people that play DFS. And yeah, it's always fun to see the screenshots of winning 6 figures and kind of, that's great, but that might not be everybody. So we want to have every end of the spectrum. But another piece that makes, I think, your content so well, that we'll get into in a second, but is the consistency that I think you do really well in, and that you just talked about, of playing the mini max kind of each week, and then 150 lineups, but then player pool construction, which I think you do really well. But Drew, I'll kind of kick it off to you, man. I mean, maybe I'll ask you kind of both the question, because I've heard from a number of people that have been on here and listening that we're getting a new wave we have gotten a new wave of people coming into PGA DFS, specifically around the COVID period, where all these sports shut down and golf was one of the first to resume. And so what do you think that has done to the industry? Has it changed anything? You know, Drew, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but what do you think?
Well, I think it certainly changed things, but I think from my perspective, like newer people jumping into the space, I think kind of gives us an advantage that have been doing it for a while, right? And Evan, you made a good point, and I guess I would ask you is because you basically won money early on, right? You didn't necessarily know what you were doing. You won money early on, and then I'm sure like at that point, clearly it doesn't always work like that, right? So
Nope.
you got early success, but I'm sure that you had struggles along the way. And kind of how did you kind of evolve your process to try to make it more profitable on a week to week basis?
Yeah, definitely. So my progression, I would say, was, I had that taste of that, almost winning like top 1% of a Millie Maker. And then I was like doing the same thing over and over again. So I was like entering, 3 lineups into the Millie Maker each week. And obviously, if you continue to do that, your chances of success are pretty low. So that's why I started to look for contests that I could max enter, like the mini max. Because I remember I used to do the first stretch I started to do, because I wanted to stay consistent too, because I really wanted to figure out, okay, if I'm going to try and take this seriously, I want to be able to enter in a contest, in the same contest each week, to kind of see and gauge how my process is going and how I'm doing. So I believe the first contest I entered was the 20 entry $3 one. And I tried that for a while, and I ended up not liking it too much, because I felt like I wanted to play too many golfers for just 20 lineups. I wasn't comfortable playing with that small of a player pool. So that's why I eventually went to the mini max, where I can enter 150. So I don't feel bad for, entering in, dud Kyle Stanley lineups anymore.
Yeah. Well said. And it's a key thing, because maybe if we have gotten new faces and involvement because of the pandemic into PGA DFS, I've been doing it a long time, before even DraftKings was a thing, back into the Draft Street days. So a while.
OG.
Real. And things have changed. And so part of wanting to, I kind of started made this Twitter account was to, help, maybe if it wasn't bring in these new faces, understand DFS. Not that I'm like an expert or anything, but just recognize that there's multiple ways to succeed in DFS. We often talk about on here about leverage and the game theory aspect and everything like that. But obviously finding what ways that work for an individual. And I think, Evan, that you got something that works well for you. And so I ask you, there's a lot of debate of why someone might want to play 150 versus just doing, a couple darts into the Millie Maker. And then there's people who also say that, gosh, if I did 150 lineups every week, I would win. And so my question is, what got you started, or what said, hey, I might have an advantage making 150 lineups in a smaller entry than doing a few at a higher entry? Does that make sense?
No, yeah, and I was definitely one of those people at first. I was like, if I give me 150 lineups in the Millie Maker, guaranteed win. That's just how I felt. I obviously don't feel like that anymore, but I think it goes back to, like I said, I had a bunch of. I think where I find my advantage personally is I've been following the tour so closely, especially ever since it came back from COVID, like we said, that I feel like I know the golfers that are towards the bottom of the board, typically in pricing and odds. I feel like I know them way better than the general public does, just from following on PGA Tour Live or, Shot Tracker every day. So that's where I feel like I have an advantage. And in order to capitalize on that advantage, I feel like I'm playing a lot of guys that are, not great most of the time compared to the field. So I want to get as many of those opportunities as possible without kind of overexposing myself to just one particular player. And yeah, that's kind of how I've gone about it.
Yeah. Well said. And so one thing I asked, because I want to ask, and I think, Drew, you might want to share too, just player pool construction, but I've really been impressed when, you do a great job of posting your percentages in your player pool. And the number one question people might send me on a DM on Twitter is, how large should my player pool be? So then I'll ask, what do you typically do? But also, how do you weight your player pool? We talk about often on the show, like the pyramid. And I think I've seen you have like up to 65% is one of your highest owned guys, but maybe later it's like last week it looked pretty flatter with, your highest owned guy is around 40. So not to put you on the spot, but the two questions, is how large typically is your player pool? And then what's the decision making to either flattening that pyramid, or kind of maybe extending it up to, sometimes I have my highest owned guy in 150 lineups is 100% the lock buttons on them. So yeah, so how do you go about that?
Yeah, and I've been there before too. I think I've done that with Morikawa, and I've done that with Sung Jae before, is the 150 lock them in. But it really depends on the tournament. I think last week you saw a more widely distributed ownership share because of how good the field was last week. If it's a smaller, or not a smaller field, but if it's a field that has more of like the best players at the top, and more of like a bottom tier that's kind of all the same, I'll take more strong stances. And especially it really depends on ownership too. Like if I find a guy that I really like in the 9K or the 10K range that no one's really gravitating towards, that's going to be a week that I try and make my life easier and eliminate the field that doesn't want any part of that player, and I'll be the one to roster them. So that's kind of how I go about it in a general sense, kind of varying on week to week on how good the strength of field is. But I also ask myself, I try to identify players that I feel like I have an edge on versus random DFS player person. And when I'm saying that, I'm normally talking about, like I said, the players that are not really that great, not normally priced in the 8K, 9K, or 10K range. So a good example of that from last week for me was Cameron Young. And I tweeted about him, I think it was at the Farmers, but he had gotten a lot of broadcast attention that week because he was playing well. And then also his former college roommate, Will Zalatoris, was in second place and almost winning that tournament for a majority of the time. So that got me thinking that, I hadn't done much research on it. I knew of Cameron Young from just, perusing Fantasy National, and I saw he won 2 Corn Ferry Tour events back in 2020, back to back. And I don't follow the Corn Ferry Tour that often, but I know if you win back-to-back tournaments, that's pretty good. So he was on my radar for the Farmers, and then they started talking about his relationship with Zalatoris, and I was trying to think, what differentiates the two of those guys. And for Will, obviously we had seen a lot of him from the last year. He played well in the U.S. Open or one of the majors that he played really well.
Masters.
And the Masters, came in second place at the Masters. So I looked at those two players and I was kind of thinking, if they roomed together at Wake Forest and played competitive golf together, they can't really be that far in terms of skill, can they? That's kind of like a question I asked myself. So then, I did a couple, quick Google search, and one of the first articles I read from Golf Digest was like, yeah, Cameron Young used to beat Will Zalatoris all the time at Wake Forest, and to see him win the green jacket, or to come in second and almost win a green jacket, that's got to give Cameron Young a big confidence boost. So ever since I realized and I put that together, I said to myself, I'm going to continue to roster Cameron Young over the field until, it either works or it doesn't work, because I believe that his skill set is not that far off from Zalatoris's. So that's kind of one example of like a guy that I feel like I have an edge on over the field. Another example of how I find these golfers in the bottom range are I found on Twitter, I forget how I got turned on to him, but there's this golf coach, Justin Parsons, who he's coached Louis, Harris English, Brian Harmon, Michael Thompson. And, when I read all these names of these guys, Seamus Power, Gary Woodland, Will Gordon, I see guys that are kind of popping in most recent, in like 2022. Harris English and Louis, obviously, they kind of go without saying, they're top tier talent. But Brian Harmon, 14th in the Waste Management, 3rd at the Amex this year. Michael Thompson came in 5th at the Sony. Patton Kinsire came 10th at Waste Management. Seamus has been one of the hottest golfers since 2022 started. So I kind of look at each field and I kind of see if I can identify any of these guys, and I look at their ownership, and if it's, if no one's really going to them, that's where I'll step in.
Yeah, well said. I really like your you're kind of, I guess, diagnosing your process about Cam Young, for example, the recognizing that you're finding value, and I'll say just the class type that you're putting just your own research, your own opinion, your own belief, putting in the same class type as Willie Z. And we know Willie Z, what he has done, his upside. He is priced and owned in a particular way. And so then you're saying, gosh, okay, I'm putting Young in a similar class as that, but he's severely maybe underpriced and underowned. And so you're buying on him and holding until he, wins for you, or if he maybe, don't let me put words in your mouth, but likely, because unless he's 10K and then 20% owned. I mean, Drew, what do you think?
Yeah, no, so it's interesting. So like Cameron Young, great play last week. We already see he's ascending up the salary rankings, right? He's 8,600. I don't think Cameron Young is going to surprise people anymore. You'll see an ownership percentage for him specifically go up just because of recency bias from what we saw last week. But I think it's a great point. And it's not even that you have to follow the Corn Ferry Tour so much. It's just knowing that now the guys on that circuit and are ready to win immediately, right? When they step on tour, they're ready to win. It's not like, hey, we have to get our feet wet. Like, think of when Hovland, Morikawa came out. Those guys immediately came out and were fantastic. So kind of keeping an eye on it and kind of knowing, what people's strengths are is certainly an advantage until the DFS world catches up with you. And I think that watching out and kind of looking at what's happening, you can get the early edge on them. And I still think there's an edge to be had on Cameron Young. I mean, the guy hits it a mile and he's super talented. But before last week, outside of Farmers, I just don't think that that's a household name for a majority of people playing DFS. And that's where you gain a distinctive edge, right? And so when you're building the player pool, back to your original question, ownership percentage is definitely going to be important. But what you said, Evan, struck with me is when there's top heavy, like when it's a loaded field and you can kind of spread the value across. So like, for example, this week, not a very much loaded field. Yeah, there's some high-end names. You're going to build, in my opinion, tell me if I'm wrong, for what you did last week, it's going to be different this week, right? Because the field are just completely opposite. And I think that that's something people need to think about, right? The way we build 1 week and create our player pool changes from week to week based off venue and field. And I think that was a very important point you brought up.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing. And I think I tweeted out that last week, Adam Scott was, I think, one of my locks. He was one of my highest owned guys. I think, I'm pretty sure I tweeted that out. And he was 20% owned. He wasn't flying under the radar. So I know we preach a lot about leverage, but here comes their own, obviously, opinion, and we'll call it handicapping strategy that I've said, gosh, okay, I believe Adam Scott is good chalk, for example. And so to get leverage on the field, I'm not going to match ownership. I'm not going to own 20% shares of them if the field's going to be 20%. To get some sort of leverage, I'm going to have to go, 80 to 100% owned to really capitalize that. I'm kind of betting on myself and my kind of philosophy, the process of it. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It did last week. Unfortunately, didn't have all the pieces. But Evan, before we kind of move on and look at the board, I'll ask you just kind of the specific question is, when you're building 150 lineups, how large is your player pool typically, week to week?
So I've been trying to, like I said, I'm trying to get better about like making sure I stick to a process. So I've been like keeping track of all this stuff. So since the Fortinet, I've averaged around 35 golfers in my player pool. That range, the most I've averaged, or the most I've rostered in a given week was the week before at the Waste Management for I had 47 in my player pool, and that was one of my worst weeks ever in the mini max. So I think I find that I'm best when the pool is between 35 and 40. That's just kind of how it's worked out for me. I don't really know if that's the best way. Because I look at I sometimes peruse Roto Grinders, the results database, and just to see who else was entering in 150 and how many players did they have in their pool. And I see a lot of people that are like 60, 70 people in their player pool. And it's not for me. I don't really know how you can build good lineups that way, because at the end of like, if we take that example and look at my Cameron Young, like if I was playing 70 people and I wanted to play Cameron Young, I probably only have like 4 or 5 lineups.
Exactly.
And then at that point,
if your player pool is too big, you're actually kind of losing power in the sense of your player pool has holes in it and is vulnerable. And so sometimes people think the larger the player pool, the more win equity I have in a DK contest. And not necessarily true, because when you have a tight player pool, like 35 to 40, like what you do for 150 lineups, ultimately you're going to be have a higher chance theoretically to win a GPP if your player pool kind of peaks that week. But your player pool can peak and you not do that well if your player pool is huge and you have all those holes, those vulnerabilities. So, and again, my opinion, and I look at the results database too, and week to week you can find some crazy things, but I just think long term in a timeline of multiple years, I'm like you. I want a tight player pool that when I'm wrong, but when I'm right, it gives me a higher opportunity to finish in that 1%.
Yeah.
So
I think it also lacks decisiveness to an extent, right? Like when you have a super large player pool, you're almost hoping that, hey, maybe there was a specific person I wasn't 100% in on that I might get lucky with. You know what I mean? So when you can kind of hone it down, it's like, hey, listen, I'm going to ride or die with the guys that I have. And I think, Evan, you mentioned earlier, when you were playing the $3.20 max, you were kind of figuring out how to develop a player pool, and you were kind of figuring out what works best for you. And you're like, listen, I probably have too many golfers based on the amount of lineups that I'm playing. And so that's just something you have to do. But I feel like if you can get decisive and kind of hone in the player pool to a smaller figure, there's going to be weeks that you're not right. But the weeks that you are right are going to be way more beneficial than to where you spread it out to 60 or 70.
Yeah, exactly.
Well said. Well, let's move to the board and take a first look. I know it's Monday night. We don't have ownership projections. It's probably early on in everyone's handicapping process. But let's move to the board if that's all right with you, gents. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So we're going to start, because you're the guest of honor, Evan. The top of the board, we're going to go 9K. So that's Matt Jones. Surprisingly, never thought I'd see Matt Jones at 9K. 9K all the way up to Sung Jae. What's one or two guys, Evan, that you're kind of have an early lean on this week?
It broke my heart to see Sung Jae at the top price, 11,000, because I absolutely love playing Sung Jae. He's one of my favorite golfers to watch. I followed him around at what tournament was it? That was at Liberty National this past year, but I followed him around on that. But yeah, I have a feeling I might, generally when I play someone that high in the or in terms of pricing, I think the last time I did it was Rom at one of the most recent tournaments that he was like the overwhelming favorite at. I typically go pretty heavy. So I don't know if I want, I definitely will have exposure to Sung Jae, because obviously he won this tournament back in, I think, 2019 or 2020. And I think he came tied 8th last year. So he's had the course history. He's been playing pretty decent golf lately, not really in his best form, but I think he shows, a lot of good signs, 6th at the Farmers, 11th at the Amex. So I'll definitely have shares of him. I don't know if I want to be as overexposed as I usually am on him, because I like him when he's in the 8K, 9K range. I just fire him up for like 50% almost every week. But we'll see what happens this week. What I'm curious about so far when looking at the board, Neiman at 10-6, and right now I'm just looking at Fantasy Nationals ownership projections, and right now he's kind of like the person that no one's really going to, other than maybe Brooks. But Neiman's had some pretty good success at the Sony, which I kind of consider a correlated course. A lot of people that typically do well at the Sony typically also do well here for whatever reason. I don't really know why, but that's just something I noticed. But a part of Neiman's game that specifically I thought was an issue for him was his around the green game. And last week he played exceptionally well around the green. I think he gained over 5 strokes around the green. So that's something I think he struggled with at this tournament in particular in the past. So if he's somehow figured that out, 10-6, you're kind of asking him to do pretty well. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'll be able to get to him, but I think he presents an interesting leverage opportunity because not a lot of people like to roster the guy who won last week. Anyway, so yeah, him and Neiman were kind of the two names that caught my eye based on ownership and based on their pricing.
Well said. Yeah, good analysis. Drew, what are you looking at?
Yeah. Hey, listen, Sung Jae at this ballpark where things are so heavily favored on approach, it makes tons of sense. I'll move a little bit further down the board. Hopefully I get the injury ownership, projections for Daniel Berger, because there's absolutely no reason not to play Daniel Berger. If you're thinking that he's okay, everything kind of tells you to play him here. The play that I might not necessarily have tons of data to back me up is going to be Billy Horschel. But the reasons that I like Billy Horschel, he's had some success here. He's been fine. Although we've seen recently, he's kind of scored himself way, his scores have been way better than his actual ball striking in a game have been. But in a golf tournament where, 12 under is probably the peak of where they're going to get to, I really like Billy Horschel this week. So Daniel Berger would be my guy. And hopefully, again, we get that ownership kind of down a little bit with the other guys right there. I do like the Neiman call. And it's funny to me how people continuously like fade the guy that just won. Like clearly the guy's in form, right? Like it's just, it's one of those mind tricks we play with ourselves. Like, okay, the guy can't win back to back. Well, yeah, it's completely rare, but certainly the guy's in the form to do it. But yeah, I would go with Billy Ho and Daniel Berger.
Well, it just depends how crazy he and Ortiz and Vegas and Mito and Sergio how crazy they got in LA last night, because they looked like a fun group at the end when he finished on 18. But I like the Berger call. I think if Berger came in, no injury concerns, made the cut, maybe finished top 15 at Phoenix, Berger's your highest owned guy in this tournament, so you likely get a little bit of an ownership discount.
Too, probably.
Yeah, no doubt. And I like your Billy Ho call. I came into this week thinking, gosh, okay, Billy's going to be an easy fade because he's done his damage with the putter. He's gained around 5 strokes in the last 2 tournaments, but he showed some life off the tee and tee to green in Phoenix. So I don't hate that play. Has good course history here. I'm almost, depending on ownership, I like to wait till FanShare comes out, but depending on ownership, my highest owned golfer may be Keith Mitchell. Keith Mitchell has gained strokes off the tee since July. So every single tournament let's start at the 3M. Even gained it before they're at the John Deere. We'll start at the 3M in late July. He has gained strokes off the tee in every single tournament where strokes gained metrics are kept. So really big on that. We know he's a winner here. The last 2 tournaments, 2 top 15s, 10th at a Phoenix, 12th at Pebble Beach, gained 4.9 off the tee, 2.1, 9.3 tee to green at Phoenix. Coming in hot. We know he's putted well here. Bermuda is his best putting surface. Really like Keith Mitchell. If he is, I'm going to say 20% or below, he might be my highest owned golfer. Really like Keith Mitchell. And then Shane Lowry kind of played well here. I kind of think, even though it's not a solely comp course, but Hilton Head, where he has some success at, where you have to keep it in the fairway, you have to drive it well. He's played well before. I think he'll be low owned, but he has some pretty good results overseas. So those are the 2 guys on top of, I know, M and Neiman and Berger and whatever on top of them, but those are the guys I'm looking at. Just moving quickly down to the 8K, and we're going to include the 7K range. So I know it's a lot of golfers, but Evan, why don't you start us off? Who piques your interest in the 8K and 7K range?
Well, I'm going to be going back to my guy Cam Young at 8,600. I'm not a fan of the price bump. It's not the same as rostering him in like the 6K range, but right now it's looking like 11% ownership, it seems. I'm okay with that. I'm going to keep betting on that I'm right and that his skill set is closer to that of like a Will Zalatoris than we think. So I'm going to continue to roster him. Brian Harmon, this goes back to my Justin Parsons take. I know he's been playing pretty well. I believe, so I think I already said this, but he finished third at the Amex. He's, gained off the tee past 2 tournaments and gained three strokes on approach last tournament at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. So I'm in on Brian Harmon. He doesn't look like he's going to have that high ownership. People are going to Vegas. I am okay fading that. Not really for me. But then other than that, I'm looking at Aaron Wise at 84. If people remember, Aaron Wise started his tournament last year, I believe, with 2 opening or a first round and second round 64, and then the weekend he shot, I think, 75 or 73. So I'm looking to buy on Aaron Wise because I think overall his golf career seems to be going way up in terms of trajectory. And the fact that I know that he's been able to put up 264s here last year, I'm willing to make that play this year.
Dude, Evan, we're on the same page here for a lot of things.
Yeah.
I love Aaron Wise as well. He had a 13th here last year. And the nice thing that you like to see is the strokes gain approach last week. He gained almost 3 with approach. It kind of just sets up beautifully for this week. I know the putter he's using is atrocious. He lost 3 last week. We hope we can just get a little bit better. Again, Aaron Wise is one of those guys, if we can just push it with the putter, like just even strokes gain data, then we're going to be right where we need to be. I will go with Russell Knox as well. A guy that's just been playing pretty damn well here lately. If we look at it, 3, it's actually funny to look at. Looks like 3 straight 33rds. So consistent. We might be able to pencil him in for a 33rd. But again, 3.4 last week. And I do think that the greens last week are going to be way more difficult. I think that this golf course asks more from you as far as an approach standpoint than it does on the greens than it does, at last week at Riv. And then I'll go back to Aaron Rye, just a good ball striker. Didn't have a great week at Genesis, lost over 2. But, I mean, Aaron Rye right now sits at 7,400. So a great building block to make lineups with. So those are kind of the 2 or 3 guys. But I'm definitely in with Harmon, Wise, but then I'll go Knox and Rye as well.
Yeah, I like the Rye call, especially because accurate off the tee, at least from longer data that we've had on the European Tour. But Evan right here is right. Driving accuracy is really important, and we know from this tournament played here so often, a lot of golfers go less than driver off the tee because there's water everywhere. The Bear Trap is one of the 3 holes that combined has the highest score on the PGA Tour. Speaking of Russell Knox, I saw has the best average score through the Bear Trap. I think it's 6 under. So shout out to Russell Knox. I like him too. Kind of big on Taylor Moore, a little bit like similar to Keith Mitchell. Gained it off the tee consecutively, only has lost it once, and that was the Amex in his very short PGA Tour career. Accuracy off the tees, gained it on approach in 2 straight tournaments. I like Taylor Moore. I like the gym rat, Michael Thompson, trending well. Yeah, the big gym rat.
That's your guy.
Surprised how big that is.
That's your
guy now. Ever since San Diego, Michael Thompson's kind of my boy. And then I'm surprised you didn't mention your boy, Drew, Chris Kirk. This is a good course history, playing better. Yeah, like Chris Kirk. So those are, I guess I mentioned 3. Those are my 3 guys in this range. But now we get to the fun range. We get to the sicko range, the Pepto specials, # Blatant Golf Boys. Evan, start us out. I feel like this is your bread and butter down here. Who are you liking as maybe some sleepers?
The first guy I really want to be over the field on is Harry Higgs. He's actually coming in with pretty good form. People remember him from the Waste Management when he lifted his shirt up on 16. So I love Harry. The guy loves Tito's. Seems like a great time. So I think he's had pretty good success here. Yeah. So in his 2 times here, he played it last year. He gained 8 strokes on approach, lost 3 putting. finished T19, and then in 2020 he still made the cut, still gained 3 strokes on approach, but lost 5 strokes putting. So both those rounds he gained a lot of strokes on approach, 3 in 2020, 8 in 2021, but lost a ton putting. So I'm looking at Harry as a guy, if he can just flip this putter around for the whole week, this week, and he can gain, the minimum he's gained is 3 strokes on approach. So if he can gain that again, he's going to be looking really good. So Harry Higgs is the first guy in the 6K range that I definitely want to be over ownership on. Another guy is Kramer Hickok. I really like his game. He's been someone I've kind of been rostering week to week. I like that he hits a lot of fairways. Another guy that I kind of like finding players that have other PGA Tour players advocate for their game. And specifically, Kramer had Sam Burns advocate for him. I forget whatever tournament. I think it was because Kramer was in a playoff against someone. I'm forgetting who it was last year. But I remember Sam Burns was watching Kramer play. I guess they're friends or something like that. But ever since then, I kind of feel like Kramer's been a little bit undervalued in terms of the betting odds and his salary. So, yeah, Harry Higgs and Kramer Hickok are going to be my first 2 stands in the 6K range.
Evan, that's funny that you mentioned you like tour players who tout like other golfers. It's funny. That's how I got on Gooch a long time ago before the fall swing, because I was listening to Max Homa talk on, must have been some podcast or something, and he was hyping up Taylor Gooch. And this was
exactly
Gooch
what
had
you're talking about.
had 6 missed cuts. And I was like, all right, let me look at this Gooch kid. And then, a couple of months later, he got hot. So that's funny you mentioned that. But Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. I love looking at it from a different perspective like that too. That's unique and can give you, an advantage. Just a quick note. The one thing I thought that was crazy to read is last year there was like over 216 doubles or worse for the field throughout this week, which is absolute carnage, and we'd love to see it. Anyway, I'm going to go with Austin Smotherman in this range. Just a really good ball striker. He's good off the tee. He's in the top 30, in strokes gained approach. I think it's 6,800. He's priced incorrectly. And then I'm going to go back to the well. A guy that Rob and I like a lot in play in the 6K range is going to be Matt Neesmith. He fits a lot of what Austin Smotherman does well. He's tough. He's tough to kind of handicap him because there's a lot of times where I'm on him and it's wrong. But like, again, if this golf course out of these 6K range guys, I think that it sets up well for those 2. So those will kind of be the 2 in the 6K range I'm looking to play.
I love that. Those are actually the 2 guys I had highlighted to mention. This is a Neesmith course that you just need ball striking. Avoid the big numbers. He's terrible putting, unfortunately, but if he can avoid the big numbers and ball strike this course to death, he's right in it. And it's hard to find a 6K golfer not playing as better than Austin Smotherman. Really like him. And so then if I have to name a few golfers, there's just 2 I'll mention. Nick Watney, my boy.
Your boy.
He's rounding back into form. And then surprisingly, Ryan Armour, accurate off the tee, playing pretty decent, trending-wise on approach. Gained 6.3 on approach at the Sony corollary course. Then gained again at Pebble Beach, finished 20th and 28th. He's kind of in the mid 6K range. So I'll add Watney and Armour to that, but I really like the Smotherman and Neesmith call. There's one guy left that I really, really like and will be high on this week, and that's CT Pan in the 7K range.
Yeah.
Played well here last year, but really kind of sneaky good last week, but really trending nicely. So those are my guys. Oh, Evan, any kind of final thoughts you have just thinking about the week before we let you go and put this to bed?
I want Sungjae to win, but I don't know if I want to bet him at 10-1. I was so sad this morning waking up and seeing him at the favorite betting odds and also the highest price golfer. So I really don't. This will be probably the first week I'm not super overexposed on Sungjae in a while, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I will go. Maybe I'll lock him in. Maybe I'll do 150. Who knows?
There you go.
But thank you for having me. I guess this has been awesome to be able to talk the Honda with you guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time, and it's nice hearing your perspective and your strategy because, maybe people get tired of hearing Drew and I talk week to week.
Talk about Matt Neesmith.
Yeah, we'll save that when we get off here. All right, everybody. Well, good luck this week. Back at the Florida Swing, we get, I don't know where in the world you're at, Evan, but on the East Coast, we get golf as soon as you wake up, and nothing better than that. So
Beautiful.
Good luck this week. Do well, be kind, do something that you all want to do, and cash some winners. We'll see you later.